thank you for attending this event with the esteemed Maria Hinojosa. We're very excited to be hosting for the young readers edition of Once I Was You, which was also the focus of our Uptown Reads initiative a couple of years ago in 2020. First of all, though, I'd like to introduce you to the space. Who here has been to Word Up Community Bookshop before? Well, just a few. Okay, so Word Up is actually not this space. It's the community bookshop and art space at 2113 Amsterdam Avenue, so not too far from here at the corner of 165th Street. And when we started, we weren't there originally. It was actually a little further up, 176 Broadway. It was supposed to be a 1-month-long pop-up shop 11 years ago, but there was so much support for that space in that month we were supposed to be there. People were really telling all the neighbors to come out and, pressuring elected officials to pressure the landlord. So we got extension after extension at our original space, so we were there for over a year. In that time, a volunteer collective built up, and we've been doing our best to work collectively ever since. At any given time, our collective numbers, 40 to 60 people actively doing shifts or administrative roles or doing book fairs out in the community, and whatever we can do, taking the lead from our neighbor, from each other, from our communities, to what people need. So when we opened at the current space, which is still not this space, this is the one at 165 in Amsterdam, we've been there now for 9 years, and we, besides the book events, which are really the focus, books and all the educational workshops that we do anchor the space, but we do our best to do, all kinds of resource facilitation. Anything the community needs, we want to be responsive as much as possible, and even just the space itself. So if you also ever need space for anything, community meetings, workshops, classes, or also maybe your own books that you're writing, then please let us know. We also welcome people volunteering, contributing any way you can. We're a nonprofit, so obviously also welcome any donations if you like what happens here tonight. And that's Word Up. So, work as a collective. One of our earliest collective members, who's been with us for about half the time of Word Up until his health took a turn, had passed away from COVID in June 2020. So right before Tom Burgess went on a ventilator, he called and said, in case I'm incapacitated, here's how you get into my apartment, here's the super's number, here's how to access my storage units, with you and Word Up, let's figure it out. And so he passed away in 2020, and the collective, his friends from the early days of Word Up, have slowly, tried to empty out his apartment and then collected it all here. So that's how this place came about. This was where we were sorting books and trying to sort out, the life of our friend. And, some of those books even still had Post-it notes of the names of people he meant to give them to, or boxes on them of people who he meant to pass them on to. And so we felt like the best way to honor him and this unexpected donation is to also it's called recirculation because his email was recirculation@gmail. And so we're trying our best to recirculate to the community. Most of the used books here are pay what you wish. There are some new books at the counter, and increasingly we've been trying to do more events. In times of COVID, it's nice to have a little bit more space, and workshops. And again, if there's anything that you want to see here, please let us know. Especially because you are the first sort of group that we can tell this to. It has not been announced officially or publicly in any way, but we just signed a lease yesterday on this space. So we have it for the next 11 months. It's supposed to be a year-long lease, but the lease actually started, August 1st, but wasn't signed till yesterday. So that's 11 months to make of it what we can in terms of having it as a community space, a community gallery, book circulation space, and it's really cool to kick it off with this. I mean, to have such a great event be the first, official thing that happens here at Recirculation is really exciting. And it's also exciting to Stephanie Hernandez will introduce Maria and will moderate the event. Stephanie has been a longtime Word Up volunteer and has been a recirculation key holder for holding it down here. We had this massive flood here last summer, and so many of us really wiped out with being here all the time, and we stayed open because Stephanie just still kept at it and was no, let's keep it open for the community. She's a school teacher. She lives very close by. She knows the neighborhood very well, and we're really excited that she is going to be facilitating the event tonight. So I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Thank you. I'm a very short person, and I had to go up here. Good evening, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. And welcome. I want to welcome you personally to Recirculation. Can you hear me well? Yes? Welcome. They asked me to introduce you, but so many titles. Emmy Award winning journalist and a recent recipient of a what? Pulitzer? What? How did that happen? And of course, I know you because I listen to Latino USA. And so many of us, I feel, know you from Latino USA. And I am a fan, so I'm truly honored to be sitting right here next to you. I am.
It's great to be with you.
So, Maria, I read your book. It took me about a day and a half. I read it really quickly. And as I was reading, I was really thinking, I wish that I had this book when I was young. When I came to this country, I was around 11 years old, and I really felt like I was seeing somebody who I did not see when I was that age. So the first question that I have for you is, why adapt your memoir for middle grade readers?
So it's great to be here with you, Stephanie, and also in this space, and hello to everybody here. I just love the whole vibe, so it's great to be here. And hearing you say that you wish you had had this book when you arrived is yes! That's why I wrote the book. So I'm really hoping that it gets into the hands of those 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds first, because it's really a book that anybody can read. In fact, the reviewer from NBC Latino, Raul Reyes, who's a lawyer, just said, oh my God, I think I like this one more than the adult version. And it has a lot of attitude.
Yes.
So the truth is, the reason why I wrote the book is because of Adriana Dominguez right there. Raise your hand. Raise your hand, that's right. This is what a literary agent looks like. She is Uruguaya and compañera and an academic who is now my agent and an agent to many writers. And Adriana really helped to bring Once I Was You into fruition. And then I was like, whew, glad I'm done with that. And then Adriana was like, well...
One more.
Actually, we didn't know. It was more the question of, really, there's an audience for young readers like you. I'm so happy to see you here. I don't know your name, but I'm really happy to see you here. There's an audience for readers, for books for young readers.
Yes.
And I didn't really understand that. And I think it really came into fruition when you look at the data about Latinos and Latinas in particular, which is that the median age for Latinos and Latinas in the United States, do you know what it is right now? The median age for Latinos and Latinas?
8.
Very good guess. It's between 10 and 11. But it used to be 18.
Oh.
So it's come down quite a bit. So that's the reason to write this book. And also for all kids who just, are trying to find a voice and a place. So thank you for saying that, Stephanie.
What would you hope they learn from reading this book?
What do I hope that they learn? I hope that what they understand is that what they are living through in this moment in history is actually impacting their lives, and that that's okay, and that they need to understand that they're being changed by what they're experiencing in this world, especially now. I mean, everything that we've lived through in the past 2.5 years, really since 2015, and that they understand then that because it's impacted them, that they have a voice, right? And that the way they feel about things that have happened is also really important, because it's gonna, the way I felt about, living through a war when I was a little girl and the Vietnam War was happening, and I just felt like, but the people who this country is going to war with, we never hear their voices, right? And just thinking about that. And then many, 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 many years later, I become a journalist, and I'm able to actually go and speak with Vietnamese refugees, American citizens, and give them the mic and say, what do you think? And so these seeds are being planted for little boys and girls and people who are non-gender, non-binary, not non-gender, non-binary, that they understand that everything that is happening to them is like a seed. So I love I'm going to be like, okay, Stephanie said she liked it. Okay, I'm good.
No, it definitely gives them a voice. I feel like, because I work with young people, they often feel like no one listens. And sometimes we talk to them a lot, but we don't listen to them enough. I don't know if that makes sense to any of you, but it seems to be the case, especially as adults. We feel like, we have to always just talk. But they know, they perceive, they see. So I completely agree with you on that. They're impacted by what they're seeing and what they hear and the messages that they're getting from the media, from certain people in the media too, right? Yes. So I have a question that I don't know if many people have asked you this question. I hope it's not one of those questions that's repeated all the time, but I had to ask you because I feel many of us can relate to this pesky feeling of the imposter syndrome, right? Many of us have felt that way at some point, and I think for younger people, right, who are coming up, what advice will you give them on how to conquer the imposter syndrome?
So imposter syndrome, just so everybody, right, understands, right, is this feeling which we all get, which is like, why am I here? I'm going to be discovered. They're going to find out that I don't really know what I'm doing. I would go to work as a correspondent for NPR, the first Latina correspondent, and I'd just be like, oh my God, any minute now they're going to say, okay, it's over for you, Maria Hinojosa. It's over. Thank you very much. But we now know the truth about you. You don't know what you're doing. And you got here because you were completely lucky, but you shouldn't be here. Goodbye. And then it's over. That's the way it kind of felt when I would go and talk to Andaye, may she rest in peace, my therapist. And actually there's a whole conversation about labeling it imposter syndrome, because it's like by labeling it imposter, we're giving authority and power, right, to say you determine what the culture is and we're the imposter, as opposed to flipping that narrative.
Right.
So for me, I actually talk about the imposter syndrome much more for older, not so much for little kids. But I just tell people that, I don't know, do you guys know the supermarkets? Definitely here in Washington Heights and in Harlem. You know where they have the little thing where the claw, right? The claw that never claws anything. Okay. So imagine the way you combat imposter syndrome is that, like, for example, if I'll give you a perfect example, interviewing Pitbull. I'm sitting there interviewing Pitbull, and I'm just like, what am I doing here? It's not as if the claw had come and picked me up and just suddenly sat me down with Pitbull and just been like, okay, do this, There was everything that I did, all the work that I did to get to the point to get into that room with Pitbull. And so that's what I tell you. Everything that, and by the way, I use the word empirical for the kids. Great word, empirical, which is fact-based. What is fact and real? The real truth is that, in this case, I had worked really hard. I had been to college. I had graduated, and I had done all of these things. I had worked my way that it was not true that I was going to suddenly be discovered at NPR of being a complete imposter. It was not true, and it is not true. Those of you who are here, you're here for a reason and for all kinds of things that landed you here, and that's real. So I love that we talk about it. I don't tire talking about it at all.
Okay, I'm glad. I'm glad. No, that was a conversation because as I was reading, I was discussing this book with friends and sort of continue to come up. Another term that came up a lot as I was reading, and I kept thinking about that. I was like, what does that mean for young people, and what does that mean also for everybody? But you describe yourself as a border crosser, and I think when we hear those words, we have a certain connotation that comes from it, right? But what does it mean to you to be a border crosser, and how has that influenced your activism, your identity?
Wow, that's really interesting that you're like, if you identify as a border crosser, that may mean something to certain people. And I'm just like, wow, it's true. Well, the truth is empirically that I've been crossing that border since I was born, right? From the very first time that I crossed, which is when I was almost taken by an immigration agent from my mom, and I was, 10 months old. I've been crossing that border almost yearly. And I think it defines everything about me. One thing that's important to know is that that border didn't used to be the way it is now. Did not used to. And now when we go to the border, it is unsightly what this government has done. The border has become militarized because of choices by this government. There's no reason for there to be a military presence on the border. There never has been. For me, I don't know, the crossing of the border made me hyper aware of life in the United States and life outside of the United States. And that gave me a certain kind of awareness. I think as a little kid, I felt oftentimes like I didn't belong. Like which one, like, soy de aquí, soy de allá, which one, which
Ni
one
de
is
aquí, ni
ni
de
de aquí, ni de allá, which actually I now quote another rapper who actually says, ni soy de aquí, ni soy de allá, sí soy de aquí y soy de allá. It's actually, yeah, I am from both places. Can you handle it? Yes. And that's what I tell my students right now, that, if you feel that discomfort of like, soy de aquí o soy de allá, it's like, yeah, and that discomfort is our superpower. That's what makes us have this brain that works in a different way, and it is not something that we should be ashamed of.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that. I have students who often tell me, well, I'm not from either place, and I feel like they also sort of would benefit from hearing these words as well. I think, as I was reading, I sense a strong acknowledgement of community in your book, an acknowledgement of community outside of the home, right? In the university with your friends, Cecilia, right? An acknowledgement of your family as your community. What does community mean to you, and why is it important?
When I got to New York in 1979, I really didn't know anyone at all. And you guys are going to laugh now, but there were very few Mexicanos here, right? So people laughed at me, when I was like, ¿y dónde puedo comprar unas tortillas? And they were like, ¿qué? What's that? But as a Latina, what that did was it also forced me to find a community that was not, for example, what I had in Chicago, which was very Mexican, right? So then my community became mis amigas puertorriqueñas, chilenas, dominicanas from Washington Heights, all of the people who, many, many refugees from Chile and Argentina at that time, Dominicanos who were also escaping a highly politicized experience. And so, I don't know, New York at that time felt very Latino and Latina. There were huge salsa concerts all the time, everywhere. Now on 96 and Broadway, they're building a skyrise that I guess is going to be who knows how many stories, but that was where we would go and dance salsa every night at Club 96. So for me also, it was in this community, very close proximity, where my Chilean dear friend Eugenia Acuña gave me a book written by Isabel Allende. And there were no community bookstores like this, and there were Latin American women writers that we knew of, modern. So that book became like a Bible, and that book was shared in community. Like, it got torn up, and everybody was sharing that book, La Casa de los Espíritus. And so all of that, the activism of the Latino and Latina community, which, you know, what we have to experience, what we are experiencing now as Latinos and Latinas, as black folk, as queer folk, as non-binary folk, is very targeted. We feel, coño, y mujeres, right? People with uteruses, we feel attacked. We really feel like the narrative about us right now is something that we have to challenge. In the 1980s, being Latino and Latina in New York City, this was a Puerto Rican town, Dominican city, and there was racism. I mean, all you have to think of is Donald Trump and the way he spoke about the Puerto Rican community and the black community, but we were not necessarily having to fight against this false narrative about who we were in such a massive way because of our sense of community.
That's true. So will you say then and advise young people to find community? And
oh, absolutely. You have to find community. You have to find it and create it. And I mean, I think that the only reason why this country has not completely fallen apart is because of the community and because of the activism. And, you know, I think of someone who has nothing to do with my experience, which is Harriet Tubman, right? It's like, how did she feel inspired? Because of that community. It was like, go, Harriet, go. And, you know, Harriet suffered a traumatic brain injury, and that's why she would have these, you know, moments of, in the end, it was liberation dreaming. She was dreaming of liberation and of freedom, and that sense of dreaming in this country is what's going to get us to a better place, I hope, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that.
Absolutely.
Community is very important to me, reason why we have this space, right? And speaking of community and speaking about activism, you mentioned that your mother will take you to civil rights protests, and I was wondering, why is it important for young people to see adults, especially their parents, going to protests and marching?
So my mom, and I think that like many Latinas and Latinos in the United States and Latinx right now, my mom, going through the civil rights era, she understood that she stood on the lives of Black Lives Matter. It was very clear where she stood. And I feel like right now it is very clear for our young people where they stand,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so giving this kind of historical context for me is very important, so that young people understand that they have a profound sense of justice and
Yes.
fairness of what is right and what is wrong. And that's why, I mean, you keep saying, well, I think you've been asked this question. Actually, this is the first public event for Once I Was You, the Young Readers Edition. So all of these questions are new for me. I know, it's so adorable, and I love that it's here in Washington Heights, where I lived for many years before I moved to Harlem. But that's why it's so important to continue to model for our kids, right?
Yeah.
Because when I was living in Washington Heights, I had no idea that I would end up writing a book or two or three or four or winning an Emmy or a Pulitzer. But that's what I'm trying to say to the young kids, right, is that the seeds are planted and anything can happen.
Do you think that your family's involvement, your sister's activism, your brother's activism, I was very now for your family, it sounds amazing. Do you think that influenced you to become a journalist?
So that's what ended up happening in the writing of this book, is I actually had to do the research and spend some time interviewing my family members. And I actually thought that my brother Raul had been the one who was instigating the desire to go to protests, and it was actually my older sister Bertelena, who it turned out was actually like a young socialist, a radical activist for Black Lives Matter in her high school. But she kept it on the down low, whereas Raul had a big mouth and was always talking about things in my family. But I think, to answer your question about why we have to take our kids to protest, there was a story that I wanted to tell which responds to this question. So, I don't know if, because this is a young group of people, which is great. But in 2006, there were massive protests for immigrants, immigrant right protests all across the country. And there were 1 million people in Los Angeles, 500,000 people in Dallas, more than 500,000 people in Chicago. And it was immigrants, black immigrants, Asian immigrants, Latinx immigrants, taking to the streets and saying, you see, there's nothing to be afraid of. We are here. Don't be afraid. And I came back to New York, and there was going to be a immigrant rights protest downtown by the courts. And Raul was, 8 or 9. Jurema, my daughter, was there. And I just said, okay, we're going to go to the demonstration. And Raul said no. He said, I don't want to go. And I said, pero por qué? And he said, because I'm scared. And I said, but what are you afraid of? And he said, well, I've been seeing the protests on the news, and I'm afraid. And this is when it really doubled down, and I was so appreciative that my mom also doubled down, because back in the 60s also it was like, ooh, protests are scary. Ooh, protests are dangerous. No, that is an image that is created so that we don't go, right? In fact, they are overwhelmingly peaceful, including the Black Lives Matters protests, overwhelmingly peaceful. And so I said to Raul, now we're definitely going to the protest. Now you don't have a choice, because you cannot be in fear. And we went to the protest, and it was the happiest protest ever. I just remember then we went to Chinatown, and you had all the Latino and Latina babies with their like American flag bandanas on, eating Chinese food, or their taquitos. And I was like, and there were like 6 cops in all of it, 6 cops in total. No pasó nada. And I think that that's the image, right? That protest, street protest, is an essential part of our democracy.
I mean, imagine if we all lived in fear, right? If, we can't, there are circumstances where we can't. We can't let our fear define who we are and what we do and take away our rights.
Yeah.
Yes.
100%.
There's some people who
Well, I think that's the whole idea, right? And that's another reason to write the book, right? Is that right now there is a notion of fear about black people, about immigrants, about refugees, about non-binary people, about queer people. And it's like, pero, o sea, we've been here forever, all of us. Entonces, it's only going to get more like that. So what are you afraid of what we already are and what we're going to become?
Well, I love that. Are we going to be afraid of what we already are?
Yeah.
Right. I think that I just want to let that marinate a little bit because I think
I've been saying
true.
that for a long time.
It's true.
Yeah, why do you want to be afraid of what we already are? Back when I was saying that, some of you might find this funny. Back when I was saying that, the term multiculturalism was perceived as being a very radical term and something that was very scary. Ooh, all the multiculturalists, ooh! Entonces, y aquí estamos.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to continue to think about that when I leave this place tonight. So was all of this sort of the community that you have around you, right? Your mom, your sister, people who you met, all of this influenced your decision to become a journalist?
I don't know if all of that, because there were no Latina journalists that existed at all. Zero. Zilch. In the United States. Sí existían en Mexico. In the writing of this book, and once I was the adult version, I realized, no, es que I saw periodistas, mujeres, in Latin America, not here. No, I think I was influenced by my family to be very engaged, to be aware. We consumed the news, but my family, thankfully, were not like, do this, do that, make sure. And I think that me being a journalist was the furthest thing that they could have ever imagined was going to happen.
they surprised?
Because, I was a bit of a radical in college. So I was a revolutionary in college. That's how it kind of started. I was very radical. I wanted to do theater. So I think mi papa was just really happy that I had decided not to become an actress. And then when I told him that I was going to be a journalist, and, my dad watched Meet the Press, he would watch the Today Show, and so I think he thought, and I was very, again, a radical, and I was like, no, papi, nunca voy a trabajar para un medio comercial. Olvídate. I'm not working for any of the commercial news networks, and I think he was just like, nah. And then the happiest moment, one of the happiest moments was when my dad, weeks before his death, was able to see me on Meet the Press, which is the show that he always watched.
Amazing.
I don't know if he quite knew what was happening because by then the Alzheimer's had really dug in. But it was like, and that thing that we have as immigrants and our dads, and just like, valió la pena, papi. The Pulitzer, when I won the Pulitzer, I was like, okay, papi, yeah. I won the,
Yes.
you made it happen.
You're reminding me of this idea of the, what is it, immigrant bargain, American bargain? I'm not sure if anybody knows the terminology, but this is when the immigrant parents want their kids to achieve the American dream. It's not that they will achieve it, but if their kids do, that
Correct.
is enough.
Right.
So
right.
you were sort of...
Well, my dad achieved his dream. I mean, mi papa had this really crazy dream in a small city in Mexico, in Tampico. In the 1950s, he was dreaming, como un loco, like, maybe I could help create something that deaf people can use so that they can hear again. And that's what my dad ended up doing. He helped to create the cochlear implant. So his American dream, I think, did come true, but I think his feelings about this country were also complicated, as we all should have complicated feelings.
Yeah. Understandably, yeah. There are times we feel like, yes, great, we belong here, and there are times where it's hard.
But here's the thing. When I read the quote from Frederick Douglass, and I'm going to get it wrong, but basically, those of us who love our country the most are the ones who are going to criticize it the most.
Yes.
And sometimes that happens, and but you're not motivated because you want to take the country down. You're motivated because you want it to live up to everything it says says it is.
I don't have the quote marked, but you actually did mention something about this in your book, because you talk about one of the best things about democracies is that you have the right to criticize your government.
Pero claro.
Right?
Yeah, I'll actually, so I received a beautiful award. I don't even know if it exists anymore. It was under the Obama administration, before I released my documentary where I criticized the Obama administration deeply. But I received an award called the ABC Award, the American by Choice Award. And none other than the former governor of Arizona and then the head of the Department of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, gave me the award on Ellis Island. And when I spoke to the 150 people who were being sworn in, I said, it is your responsibility to criticize this government. You left places where you could not, but here, this is your job. See, I'm criticizing the head of the Department of Homeland Security right here, right now. That's my job, and you can do it. And I think they were all just like, what?
Yeah.
Pero de eso se trata, con amor, claro, y respeto, pero con enojo también. It's
Right.
legit.
What advice do you have for young people who would like to become journalists?
Well, trust that feeling. If there's something in you that is telling you you want to be a journalist, trust it and go with it. But I think that's part of what I'm trying to say throughout the whole book, right? Is that as a kid, you're going to feel these seeds. And sometimes you may think, my God, I want to be an actor. I want to be a singer. But then somebody who doesn't have best intentions will take you down from that. And you have to trust, like, no, I really want to do this. So the idea of wanting to be a journalist for me is wanting to get these stories out. And that's why we decided on this cover, right? We worked a lot on the cover, making sure that the hair looked right, okay? That was the most...
Yes. It's a beautiful cover.
We had to work hard, so it was like curly, not too wavy, not too stringy. I'm just kidding. But it is about putting the mic in the hands of young people, right? And saying, you got the mic. You got the mic now. So I do hope, I mean, it's not a book to inspire young journalists, but I really do hope that a lot of young journalists are inspired. But it's about inspiring you to believe in whatever it is that you want to do.
Yes. I actually am wearing hoops today, inspired by the cover, actually. That's a fact. You can ask the people who live with me who are in the audience.
I went to the jewelry store because I just bought these a year ago because I had the same gold hoops for like 40 years. And the lady showed me a pair of small hoops like this. And I was like,
No.
Bigger. And she showed me the next one like this. And I was like,
We have standards.
bigger. And she was like, bigger? I was like, yeah.
Yes.
And she was like, shall I bring you the biggest ones? I was like, yes.
So one last question before we give it to the audience. You have an adult memoir. Now you have a memoir for young readers. What's next in the book world?
Let's ask Adriana. Well, I'm just going to say it because, okay, so Adriana, I'm always very surprised by Adriana, who's my agent, because I just never know what's going to happen. And Adriana said, so what about a children's picture book? And I was like, are you crazy? Why? I don't know. That's so, because I always think, I cannot do that. I cannot write a picture book. Why would you think I could write a picture book? And then Adriana's like, okay, I'm just going to send you a few things to get the juices going. And I'm just like, no, I can't do this. And then you'll be happy to know that I did actually sit down with all of the books that Adriana sent me, all the picture books. And I was like, okay, I think I know what I want to do. So I think I will, hopefully it won't be too hard. It won't take me a year to write it. I have the seed of 2 ideas. So that might be next. And then we're also meeting with my editor from the original Once I Was You. The thing is that writing a book, it's a beautiful experience, but it's all consuming. And I'm a Mexican immigrant, which means, what, Stephanie? It means I have 16 different jobs. All of us immigrants, we always just can never say no to work.
Completely understand.
Right? We're always just like, sure, I'll do that. I mean, sure.
Yes.
My colleague, Fernanda Santos, raise your hand. Okay. I know she's like, but Fernanda is a journalist, a professor, a mom, a writer. And then she's like, I think I'll write a book. She's wrote books. And then she's like, oh, let me see what else I can do. I think I'll co-write a musical off-Broadway. She co-wrote Americano, which just closed off-Broadway. Yes, look at her. And Fernanda moved to New York and is now working for Futuro Media, our company, and makes dreams come true. And her child, Flora, just got into like a fabulous school because Flora has an amazing singing voice, among other things. And an actor. They're going to be an amazing, amazing actor, and we're so happy that you're here. So I think the idea is, here, I'm going to tell you this. This is important. It's a little political, but everything is political. So the morning after Donald Trump won, I was not shocked, but I was definitely not happy. And I did have fear. I felt fear. And I remember speaking to an elder, and they said, during the time of the Vietnam War, during the time of World War II, of First World War, some of the most amazing art was produced because there was such repression and such desperation when we live in times of war and fear. And so when Donald Trump was elected, I was like, I'm going to be the most creative person that I possibly can be. I mean, I'm going to be the best journalist that I can be, and I'm going to be the best journalist. But also my response was to be just an incredible artist and to think beyond boundaries and to think about what's possible. And that's why I love this space and the story behind it, because all of you volunteers for Word Up, you're liberation dreamers too. You're just like, ¿qué es posible? Oh yeah, we're just gonna take over the basement of some place here on 160th, and we're just gonna make it a community space. And I don't know. I think I need to have a party up in here. Dancing.
Sure, we would love to have you
Dancing
here.
with lots of fans.
Course.
Lots of fans. So that's why we all have to continue to be inspired and to dream crazy dreams of what's possible. Because when I was in Washington Heights, again, I was like, be a writer. Oh, I can't write. That was me. I can't write. Even though I was getting A's in college. I can't be a journalist. Even though I had a radio show. I can't do this. No, we can. You can. Absolutely. For all the kids here, you can.
Thank you, Maria. So we're going to give it to the audience. With how many minutes you think we have? Okay, so we have a couple of minutes. So if you have a question, there's a mic that's going to come to you. My mic?
Does anyone have any questions?
Comments?
Yeah.
Recipes?
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Denise. I am just a resident of the community. And I myself am a Dominican American from this area. I'm an emergency medicine doctor up here.
Damn!
I just came from work. I'm sorry.
Mic drop. Whoa, in the scrub. Thank you for your work.
Oh,
Thank
no
you so
worries.
much for your work.
Thank you. But to the, like my niece Mia, who's in the audience, what do you say to the people coming up who, like, there are things you have to do to get to the level where you're at, right? You have to go to school and you have to graduate, and as much as you want to be a revolutionary maybe on the side, or maybe that's what you deeply believe, at some point you still have to kind of blend in and get by. And I wonder sort of how you approach that, thinking back on your time, kind of having to check the boxes to get to where you want to be.
The thing is, I think what I realized even in writing this book was that I couldn't blend in and get by. That there was going to be no way in which that was ever going to be possible. And so, because I was the first, right? When you're the first in a newsroom, it's like you stick out, right? So blending in was not going to work. And I did not have that experience where I could just like make it seem like I blended in. And so then what I understood was, what's my superpower is this other perspective and being able to understand that I had to bring it into the newsroom. So, for example, when I, like you, everything about you as an emergency medical doctor and as Dominicana from New York, from Washington Heights, everything about how you approach your work is going to change the way the field operates. That's how I see. That I don't want you, I mean, obviously we're all like, we have to adjust, right? We can't just, I mean, there are some people who will never adjust Donald Trump. But but you see how it's going to go for him. In a cage. But for you, or for example, for my students, or when I'm giving a speech at, let's just say, a company that's a consumer, for example, I'm like, the way you think about approaching the product is the winning, right? So you, as an Afro-Latina who's from the community, who's a woman, and you're like, I won't think of the right example, but something that has to do with a medical issue, but, it's never been done that way. And you're like, no, pero es que it has to be done this way because I know, right? I understand my community. That's where I'm like, it's not about blending in. It's actually about, here's my secret sauce and my secret power, and I'm gonna share it with you. Because the truth is that, I mean, Latinos and Latinas in particular, we're the second largest cohort, voting cohort, population cohort, and we are white, we are black, we are indigenous, we are Asian, we are, right? So this is like the crux of it. Will Latinos and Latinas understand that Black Lives Matter because we are black? Will we understand justice? Will we understand collective, right? will we understand I see myself in you? I mean, in that case, the country's going to be fabulous, right? Or will Latinos and Latinas go deeper into what we know from our own countries, which is el racismo, right? La injusticia, the dehumanization, right? So I really feel like it's, in many ways right now, is such an important time. And again, Latinos and Latinas, we are all of those things, which is why our particular responsibility in this moment is so important. Somebody, I was on MSNBC, I was on Morning Joe talking about the book and talking about politics, and on Twitter they kind of came after me and they were like, you know, you're not acknowledging Latino and Latina proximity to whiteness as to why it is so easy for them to be taken in by the Republican Party. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. We have to acknowledge that. And so by saying it and by being in community, this is how we're going to hopefully create a better country. But I'm all about us taking up more space as opposed to us fitting in, because soon it's going to have to be other. And that's why I don't use the term minority. You'll never hear the word minority. Whoops, came out of my mouth, but you'll never hear me. Because I believe that we talked about fear. That's part of the fear element, right? Which is that white America feels like they're going to be a minority. And they're like, oh, my God, and then what happens? We'll never be able to go to Washington Heights. And it's like, no, you can hang out in Washington Heights. It'll be cool. No problem. But the perception of, but it's so scary. No, it doesn't have to be that way. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
No?
Maria, you touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious to hear your take on where we're going. What do you think is the future of Latinos in the United States?
Uy, mija. A ver, ¿qué horas son? I do think about this a lot. I mean, I'm reporting about it every day. And I think we're in a particular moment. I think that the constant attack towards Latinos and Latinas, the fact that now, you know, with an NPR poll, about half of Americans believe that there is an invasion on the U.S.-Mexico border. It's like, Dios mío. You know, I just got back from North Dakota, and you're like, North Dakota? North Dakota has the fastest growing Latino and Latina population in the entire United States. One county within North Dakota grew by 1,000% of Latinos and Latinas. And the question is, so will Latinos change North Dakota, or North Dakota going to change Latinos and Latinas, right? And this is where we are. It's a very fluid conversation. And sometimes I feel like the constant attack against us, which is real, right? Internalized hatred, right? Not wanting to be who you are. Trigger warning, I'm going to bring up Uvalde, but, you know, that wasn't a surprise to me in the sense of there will be one of our own who turns against one of our own. Because el odio, you know, people are being made to hate us. And we're like, seriously? Like, pero ¿por qué? Entonces, that it would happen internally is not a surprise. So if I look on the positive side, sorry to be just such a Debbie Downer, but if I look on the positive side and I think about the activism and I think about the kids in this room and their parents, then I get really excited, right? And I think about the fact that, you know, anything is possible in terms of young people deciding to do crazy things. Like, and you know, it's not like I like politicians, but I'm going to name one who's fascinating, who is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right? And who I do hope that she becomes the first Latina president of the United States. And when I was with her, humble brag, you know, and I told her, I said, somebody asked me, what's the hopefulness? And I was like, I told her, I said, it came out of the blue that Alex, because this was somebody before I knew I was going to be with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, somebody just asked me, like, what are you hopeful about? What do you see politically? And I was like, I see AOC standing on that ridiculous wall, the most horrific, disgusting eyesore that could ever be built by the United States, that horrific wall. And I see AOC standing on top of it and saying, we're going to tear it down. We're tearing it down. The wall se baja. And that will be a moment that it is transformative. And that's the most uplifting image I have, right? Which is black folks, Latino and Latina, indigenous folks, Asian folks. We then are representing que no hay ningún miedo. There is nothing to fear at all. And when I told AOC that story, she said, of course, she demurred because, I was like, you're going to be president. She's like, mm-hmm. And then she said, the thing is, it's not going to be me only. It's got to be all of us, right? It's got to be all of us. And that's when I get, and again, it's not so much about AOC. It's more what she represents, which was just like, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to run for office as a socialist in Queens and the Bronx. And she won and became the most fascinating politician. Not fascinating Latina politician, the most fascinating politician in the United States. So that's where I'm just like that. Or when I think about the people of Puerto Rico, and how they've responded, that gives me hope. So this gives me hope.
Does anyone else have a question? Okay.
Hi, I really enjoyed your book. I read it and just absolutely absorbed every page and loved it. I learned so much, things I did not expect. So thank you. I guess my question, I hope this is a simple question. Looking back on times when you felt that you were out of place or felt you didn't belong, what did allies do that helped, or what could allies have done that could have helped?
Wow. Wow, that's a great question. That's a subject for a book, actually. I mean, what allies did, like my friend Sandy Ratley, who is the first African-American vice president at NPR, and she's a decade older than me, but she heard that I had been hired. I knew that she was there, a senior black woman journalist, and so we just connected. And we immediately went out, and she actually said, this is going to be a long haul. Pick your battles, right? Understand you're not going to be able to win them all. Understand which ones you want to go for. And this was very important for me. Also, just having her as an ally. What could my white allies have done? Coño, so much. That's why I'm just like, I think a little bit of humility would have helped. I think a little bit of humility and self-awareness. And this is why I'm so critical of liberal white America, because they really lack context and humility. And they're just so convinced that they know everything that's going on. So, I tell a story of when I was reporting in the South Bronx about some bad heroin, and then I did a lot of thorough reporting, and then I ended up in Washington, D.C. at the headquarters for NPR, and somebody very, very famous at NPR was just like, oh my God, that was so scary for you. How did you handle it? And I was like, it wasn't scary. Like, I hang out in the South Bronx. Like, those are the communities that I love. But she never would have thought to say, Maria, the first time you stepped foot into NPR, was it scary for you? That was scary. That's when I was like, yeah. So I appreciate the question, and I think it's a really important part of the dialogue is, well, what can you do? And I would say right now for my colleagues, it's just like, don't assume that it's yours, that it's all yours. That just don't assume that, right? Because, and I think honestly, I never imagined we would win a Pulitzer. True. But I think the Pulitzer win is a little bit like people just going like, wait, what? What? How did that happen? And And so it's a moment for teaching, right? It's a moment for learning, and it's a moment for thinking about how we approach stories and people that we cover in a different way. Thank you for asking.
Does anyone else have a question? No? Okay. I actually have a question. So at Word Up, we're very big music people, as you can see with our record collection, all the stuff we do. But I was just wondering, like, when you're writing these books, like, do you listen to anything? Like, do you have any music recommendations?
So, actually, my daughter was the one who turned me on to lo-fi. Do you guys know lo-fi? So it's like, how do you describe it? It's like techno jazz that has like a kind of constant beat to it. So it's a little bit like hypnotic. So when I was writing the adult version, I was listening to that a lot. When I was writing this version, where I had to become a child, and this is what I told Adriana. I was like, how do you expect me to write a book for 10-year-olds? I'm not 10. And Adriana's like, you can do this. And I'm like, what? So I ended up using, ¿cómo se llama? It's kind of hypnotic music. I'm thinking of the binaural beats. It's binaural beats. So again, very hypnotic, because I had to basically hypnotize myself to believe that I was 10 years old. So that I was like being a 10-year-old as I was in the midst of writing this book. Yeah. Very totally different. This was really a hypnosis the entire time. Because if I listen to it, or jazz, it has to be jazz. But if I listen to anything with words, like the music that I really love, like Juan Luis Guerra, before he became too, the words will just compete too much. So it has to be something just like this really intense kind of almost hypnosis. I love that question. And by the way, my career started by spinning records.
Oh, wow.
Right, at like actual LPs. That's why I'm like, I bet that guy has some of my records. Because I came and all my records have disappeared. I don't know where they are. Who knows where they ended up, But yeah, that's how it all started for me. So
We should do that here. We should have a second party.
Listen to that. You don't have to convince me to have a party, sweetie. And this is a really good floor for dancing, too. So let's talk about that.
Okay, so I think we're ready for the signing. Everyone's
Thank
good?
you so much. Thank you so much.